To give a little background on myself, I went to Alverno College for undergrad in Milwaukee. That is an explicitly trans-inclusive all-women's college. While I was there, I was in the Alverno Rainbow Alliance. When we started, there were 4 of us, and all we did was watch the L word. By the time that I graduated, it was the largest, fastest growing, and best fundraising group on campus. I interned at the Milwaukee Gay Arts Center, which was the only LGBTQIA2 art center in the country at the time. And I also interned at the Alliance School, an alternative high school for, I'm just going to say it, queer kids who had been bullied out of their regular schools. I attended seminary at Loyola University, New Orleans, and Austin Presbyterian Theological Seminary, and I facilitated workshops for mostly church groups who want to be more inclusive but don't really know how. So this evening, I'm going to talk about what is LGBTQIA2 and why are they together. Now, you've probably seen just the 4 letters or the first 5 letters or some other combination. I'm going to break down this as in writing, this is kind of the most inclusive without getting too clustery. So I'm going to start with the L and the G. Lesbian, that's a noun or an adjective. So you can say a lesbian, those lesbians. And it's also an adjective, lesbian music, such as Annie DeFranco. And that's a woman who is attracted to other women. Gay, which is an adjective, you would never say a gay. You would say a gay man, a gay person. That's either a man who is attracted to other men, or as a more generalized term, and it's an aging umbrella term for LGBTQIA2, such as gay pride. This has kind of been an overarching term over time that's kind of fading out of use now. I also included above here the pride flags. We have the lesbian flag here, and this is the gay flag. This is also evidence that gay has been an umbrella term. Next is bisexual. This is a sexuality. There are many different definitions of bisexual. This has changed a lot over time. You would also say a bisexual man, a bisexual person. You would never use it as a noun. It's a person who is attracted to men and women and non-binary people. And to clarify, if you want any explanation of any terms, please raise your hand. I do want to leave question and answer time at the end of the presentation, but I am willing to stop and be interrupted just to explain different terms. So I think Larissa will help me out there. Thanks. To keep going, another definition of bisexual is a person who is attracted to people of their own gender and also people of other genders. This has become a more common term, I'd say, over the past 10, 15 years around there. That's actually developed on Tumblr. Tumblr has been a major resource for development of these terms. Tumblr used to be a social media website. It has now morphed into TikTok. So in another 10 to 15 years, we'll have this conversation again with new terms that are being developed on TikTok right now. Final term for bisexual, a person who has multiple sexualities rather than monosexuality. This is a little unusual. A monosexual person would be heterosexual or lesbian or gay, where it's just kind of a one-to-one. Man attracted to other men, women attracted to men. In this case, bisexual would be I have a sexuality towards women. I have a sexuality towards non-binary people. It's perceived as multiple different sexualities. Usually, if someone says that they're bisexual, you don't need to know which kind. If it gets to the point where you get close to a person, you can ask them what that means to them, because it could mean any of these or something else entirely. And then we get into a related term, pansexual, another adjective. This is a person who is attracted to individuals regardless of their gender. Gender is just not a part of how they're attracted to people, or a person who is attracted to all genders. Within the community, there has been a lot of debate about what terms mean what and what should be used, but we're sticking with the initialism. We're not changing it anymore, so we're going to stick with bisexual. Now we're getting into gender. So the first three letters, LGB, that's sexuality. Any gender can have any of those sexualities. And now we're getting into transgender, which is an umbrella term. I'm going to start with the basics. Assigned gender at birth, AGAB. Assigned female at birth, assigned male at birth, and assigned intersex at birth. These are the three things that you're going to see on a birth certificate or a driver's license or a passport. You're going to see the F, the M, or the X for intersex. It used to be that within the transgender community, there'd be a conversation between gender as brain and sex in biology. Sometimes when code switching with cisgender people, we still kind of revert back to this just to keep it simple, but we're moving more into this language of assigned gender at birth, AFAB, AMAB, AXAB. So transgender is an adjective. You would say a transgender man, a transgender person. You would never say a transgender. Also, transgenderism is not a word. If you see that, that's a red flag to run away. So transgender is a person whose gender is different from their assigned gender at birth. So this could be someone whose assigned gender at birth was female and he identifies as a male. And under the transgender umbrella, we have non-binary. That's a person whose gender falls outside or between the man-woman binary. Genderqueer is another term that's a little old-fashioned. I was in Genderqueer Chicago for a few years. And then there's agender, which is someone who perceives themselves to have no gender at all. This is all under the transgender umbrella because these genders do not fit the assigned gender at birth. And cisgender, which is a term I threw at you before, that's just a person whose gender matches their assigned gender at birth. So if you were born and you were assigned male at birth, there's an M on your driver's license and you identify as a man, for example, you are cisgender. It used to be that transgender and normal was the terminology used, but we had to get away from that. So that's why there's cisgender. Next is queer, which refers to sexuality and or gender. I do want to clarify that transgender people can have any sexuality. Some transgender individuals say that they're transitioning, which is not a medical term. That is much more of a social term. Medical is a small part of it. Their sexuality sometimes changes during their transition. But if you meet a transgender person, don't assume that that's what's happening. Again, gender and sexuality are two distinct, different things. A handful of individuals will say they're related, but please don't take that for granted. So queer, it has many different terms. So there's the adjective, that's a person whose gender and or sexuality is not cis heteronormative. This word cis heteronormative, that's the treatment of heterosexuality and cisgender as the norm or as the default. So cis heteronormativity is the idea that everybody is just automatically cisgender, everybody is just automatically heterosexual, that's normal. So queer is not that, essentially. Queer is also a movement or a field of study pertaining to LGBTQIA2 history, culture, and or liberation. For example, queer theology or queer theory. Queer is also a verb, to shift a field of study, movement, medium, and or community away from cis heteronormativity. This is more of an umbrella term. However, it's also been used as a slur in the past. Essentially, if you are a cis heteronormative person, which is, that's not a slur, like that's just a reality. If that's who you are, if you don't know someone very well, don't use queer. It's good to ask, are you comfortable with this term? It's more of an insider term. This is kind of what gay used to be in the sense of an umbrella term. So I'd say that if you're granted permission to use this term, that's a good sign that you're a good ally. Like, that's a sign of allyship. Allyship is a verb, queer is a verb. If you're able to move those together in the sense of being a member of a community and helping the community, that's great. Next is intersex, which is a gender and a biological sex, an assigned gender at birth. It's an adjective unless an individual states otherwise. So you would say an intersex person. There are some people who say they're an intersex man or an intersex woman. Some people will just say, I am an intersex and leave it at that. Don't assume that that's how it is for everybody. That's just a few individuals who claim it for themselves. So this is a person whose assigned gender at birth is intersex, or who was surgically changed shortly after birth with or without parental permission to resemble either male or female. So intersex is not male and not female. The human race has multiple biological sexes. We don't hear about this one very often, largely because I believe it's 1 to 3% of the population. And also because of these forced surgeries, which are fortunately on the way out. Next is asexual, which is asexuality or a lack thereof. This is a person who just does not experience sexual attraction. And this is also an umbrella term. Under this, there's demisexual or gray sexual, which you might have heard of. That's a person who experiences sexual attraction rarely or under very specific circumstances. And again, someone who is demisexual or gray sexual, most of the time, the gender of the person they rarely feel sexual attraction to doesn't matter. So you wouldn't say a heterosexual demisexual. Like, it's just kind of understood that the gender of the person being attracted to is not a factor. And then you might have heard of this aromantic. That's a person who does not experience romantic attraction. So under the overarching asexual community, there's a perceived distinction between sexual attraction, that's someone you want to be physically intimate with, and a romantic attraction, that's someone you want to flirt with, to go on dates with, to celebrate Valentine's Day with. A lot of people in the asexual community do say that, like, the vast majority of people do have this distinction between sexual attraction and romantic attraction, but they usually align so much that nobody really thinks about it or talks about it. They are bringing this conversation forward. So there's the sexual attraction, the romantic attraction. There are some people who would say that they are asexual, but they are lesbian romantic. So this would be a woman who does not experience sexual attraction, but she wants to flirt with other women and go on dates with women, for example. And here we are at the end of the initialism, TwoSpirit. Sometimes it's written as 2S. This is specifically an Ojibwe term. This has been used since 1990 as an umbrella term for First Nations people who are, in short, not cis heteronormative. Not all First Nations people use the term TwoSpirit. There's some who want their own terminology to be used instead, which is 100% valid. And only First Nations people can be TwoSpirit. Like, this is very much a part of many First Nations cultures, languages, communities. And a lot of them have come under the umbrella term of TwoSpirit, largely to hold their own within the overarching LGBTQIA2 community. And I believe, yeah, we've come to the end of the initialism. So now we get to why. Why do we have these terms together? This LGBT, the shortest one, first became commonly used by activists in 1988. These communities, lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender, had to work together to survive the AIDS epidemic, also to survive police raids, such as the one at Stonewall, and also employment and housing discrimination and general hate crimes. So these communities, which up until this point had generally perceived themselves to be very separate from each other, very different concerns, they came together to form this initialism. And then over time, mostly throughout the 90s and the early 2000s, began adding more and more terms, especially since social media. And yes, it is a very long initialism. It's a little bit easier in writing. It is hard to say out loud over and over and over again. I can tell you from experience. So something that can really help is be specific. If you're talking or writing about something that's only pertaining to gay men, gay cisgender men, just say gay. You don't need to use the whole initialism if you're just talking about gay cisgender men. If you're just talking about transgender people, you can just say transgender people. You don't have to use the entire initialism because the vast majority doesn't apply. Also, while you're speaking, you could just say LGBTQ and leave it at that. Sometimes it can help if you start with the whole initialism and every time you say it afterwards, you just use the shorter one. Also, when you're with your LGBTQIA2 friends and family, ask what they prefer. You don't have to use one thing in all contexts all the time. Like, part of being in community and part of being an ally is being willing to shift with the social contexts. So that comes to the end of this presentation. Yes, it is. I'm ready for questions. So I'm going to use an example. If you go to Target or Walmart, or if you have a time machine and you go to Toys R Us, if you see the toy sections, how are they separated? In my experience, they're usually separated boys and girls. Yeah, so the girls section usually has pink, dolls, My Little Pony, stuff like that. And the boys section usually has G.I. Joe, Tonka truck, stuff like that. Using this very basic example, non-binary people would usually look at those sections and either think, I'm not either of those things. Where do I go? What do I play with? Or somebody who wants to play with both. Usually the non-binary experience is to look at something such as the boys and girls section in the toy store and think, why? Not why in this big philosophical sense, but this does not relate to me. This is not my experience. Clearly, I am different from these other people. So the binary is this idea that there is only masculine men and only feminine women, and that's it. Non-binary people perceive other ways of being. Now, I do want to clarify that we don't use the term third gender because there are some very specific cultures that use the term third gender and that does not apply to the overarching community. But non-binary people don't see it as man, woman, something else in the middle. It's usually much more of a wide spectrum. Some people say a constellation, where all these different people fit in all these different spaces and have different gender experiences and sometimes maybe even shift genders throughout their lifetime. Now, I do want to say that a week from now, I'm going to give another presentation on what non-binary is. So I'm going to get into it a lot more. Firstly, there are some things that you can do on your own. It's very good to practice. Something that you can do is if there are any TV shows that you watch regularly or any book series that you read regularly to the point that you actually talk about these characters in life. If you're talking about, let's say you're a big Star Trek fan, if you talked about Lieutenant Data all the time. If you talk about Lieutenant Data all the time, try practicing different pronouns for these fictional characters. Try using different pronouns for Lieutenant Data if you talk about him a lot. So this is a good way to just practice on your own. And also if you're talking about this friend or relative or whoever it is, if you have a cat, talk to your cat about them and practice. Practice on your own. When there's somebody who is talking to you in person, if you mess up their pronouns, there's always the good way to start of just saying, oh, I'm sorry, use other pronoun, and then just move on as though nothing had happened. If it turns out that months have gone by and you're still slipping up the pronouns, I'd really recommend practicing more on your own. If you slip up and somebody else gets hostile, chances are they are perceiving the slip up as you not perceiving them as valid. I'm not saying that's what you're doing, but that's usually what the perception is. Again, it's good to just apologize politely the one time. And it could be good to ask them to explain what this means to them. And again, if you want to say that you want to talk to them when they're calmer, that's fine. You don't need to stand there and be yelled at. I'm not going to say that anybody needs to be yelled at. You can say, I want to talk to you when we're both calmer. Using someone's pronoun, it's a part of relationship building. And it sounds to me like you want to be in relationship with them, and you can work on something together. If they're not willing to calm down and work with you, it's okay to say, I will talk with you when you're willing to be calm about this. All right, so dysphoric. So dysphoric is usually something that transgender people experience, although some people would argue that this is experienced by many different people. There's the larger dysphoria. Like, let's say somebody was bullied for having a big nose when they were a kid, and then they grow up and they think that they have a big nose even though they don't. So that's kind of a generalized body dysphoria, to perceive a part of your body to be different than what it really is, and it's usually a trauma response. When it comes to gender dysphoria, it's the usually very painful experience of being perceived as the gender that you're not. Like, for example, if a transgender woman, especially one who has long hair and nails and has had laser to remove facial hair, like somebody who has worked really hard, it's called sir. That's a dysphoric feeling. It's very invalidating. It can make a person wonder, am I valid? Am I real? So dysphoria it's a very painful experience. And that's one of the reasons why validating someone's gender, even if they look different than you think that they would, it helps alleviate dysphoria. The opposite of dysphoria is euphoria. Gender euphoria is somebody like a transgender man who wears a binder for the first time. Like, that's a euphoric experience. It feels very validating. It feels real. So I hope that helps to explain it. It's kind of a messy term to describe. I am going to give a plug for myself because I want people to feel comfortable to contact me with questions at any time. I have a website. I'm going to spell it out for you. If you need to write it down, get a pen and paper. It's KKRIES as in Samantha, EL.com. It's my first name and my last name. Come on. There we are. So first name and last name.com. My contact information is there. You can email me. You can find me Facebook, Instagram, and so on. I am always open to answering questions. And this is a public library. This is not a religious event, but I do have a background in theology and spirituality. So if you have questions about that, I'm also comfortable answering those too. All right, thank you very much. And again, next week, same time, same place, I will be giving a presentation on what non-binary is and non-binary etiquette. Have a great night and a great Pride.